This will be a new beginning or the end for Charles Oliveira. Oliveira has an extremely competitive matchup against Beneil Dariush set up at UFC 289. And this matchup will either propel Charles to another title shot and potentially another Charles Oliveira reign, or this could be the start of the end of Charles Oliveira. This upcoming fight for him is extremely crucial for the rest of his career. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy MMA, I make opinionated MMA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. But anyways, let's get into it. The story of Charles Oliveira is a classic underdog story. He was a guy that early on into his UFC career had moderate success. He had some nice victories, especially submission victories. He had some pretty bad losses, unfortunately. But after Charles Oliveira had his first kid, he had a complete mindset flip. At that point, Oliveira was looking much better out there. He was doing a really nice job at looking great on the feet while also looking great on the ground. And due to that build in confidence and due to that improvement in skill, he started to build somewhat of a winning streak. And eventually that winning streak paid off as he was then granted a title shot for, at the time, the vacant title against Michael Chandler. And after beating Michael Chandler and becoming the champion of the 155-pound division, that's really where Charles Oliveira's star power started. Because not only was Oliveira on a really long win streak, and not only did he just become the champion, but when you look at how he fights, he has an extremely impressive and extremely entertaining style. He's a guy that looks for the finish at all times, whether you talk about very early on or at the tail end of the fight. Charles Oliveira always looks for the finish, and that's something a lot of fans really respected about him. But after becoming the undisputed champion at the 155-pound division, his first title defense was going to be against Dustin Poirier. And going into that fight, most people thought Poirier was going to win that matchup. It was his time to finally become the champ, and Oliveira's reign would be very short-lived. But after that fight was over, Oliveira once again impressed everybody. After getting hurt early on, Oliveira then rallied and ended up finding the submission in the third round against Poirier and officially got his first title defense. And after that impressive victory, the next matchup was set up for Oliveira, which was going to be up against Justin Gaethje. And going into that matchup once again, Oliveira was the underdog, but especially after he missed weight by 1 pound, he was an even bigger underdog at that point, as people thought it would be very difficult to knock out Justin Gaethje with the great and legendary chin that he did have, and with his great takedown defense, it would be difficult for Oliveira to get the fight to the ground. But after that matchup was over, once again, Charles Oliveira impressed everybody as he won as the underdog. And this was after Oliveira got hurt early on in that matchup once again, but he eventually rallied and ended up finding the submission. And this was starting to become a common trend for Oliveira. He would get hurt early on, but he would then eventually rally and win the fight. But unfortunately, after all the success Oliveira did have, going into his matchup against Islam Makhachev, that's really where everything ended for Oliveira. It seemed like in that matchup, Charles could never get anything going, and he eventually lost via submission. And at that point, a lot of people thought Oliveira could potentially be done. Not just because he lost to Islam Makhachev, but it was the way he was fighting and all the damage that he took along the way. Everybody in the UFC is human, and if you take a certain amount of damage, eventually your chin's gonna go, and people were afraid Charles Oliveira's time could be coming soon. But that kind of brings us to the point where we're at today, as Charles Oliveira has his next matchup against Beneil Dariush at UFC 289. And this is obviously an extremely important fight for Charles. I think if he wins, he would then definitely get another title shot, and maybe he can get things going a little bit more against Islam, and maybe he could actually beat Islam Makhachev and start his reign once again. But if unfortunately for Charles, if he loses in this matchup against Beneil, then I think he would probably lose via finish, and at that point it would be really difficult for him to get back to the point where he's at today. But now let's break down this matchup between Beneil and Charles, and let's get into my predictions on who I think is going to win. So when you look at both of these guys, I actually think they have somewhat similar skill. On the feet, I do think Charles Oliveira is the more technical striker. I actually think that's pretty clear, but at the same time, Beneil Dariush definitely has some nice abilities on the feet. Although he's not as technical, I would still say he has a lot of power, and he does a lot of nice things on the feet, I would say. But in terms of both of their ground games, they both have tremendous jiu-jitsu. Once again, I would say Charles Oliveira probably has the better jiu-jitsu, but Beneil Dariush clearly has great jiu-jitsu, and he has tremendous takedown defense, as he just showed in his most recent fight. So with that being said, I do think this is going to be a very interesting fight between these two guys, and I do see this fight as a pick'em. I could see Charles Oliveira having a ton of success and maybe even finishing Beneil early, or I could see Beneil having a ton of success and maybe finishing Charles early. I do think this fight is going to end in a finish by either guy. I think both guys look for the finish way too much for there not to be a finish in this matchup. But the keys for Charles Oliveira to win this matchup is I think he has to be aggressive. I think he needs to utilize his weapons very effectively and be very diverse with them. In his sole loss that he had as of late against Islam Makhachev, a huge reason for why I thought he wasn't able to get things going is he wasn't nearly as aggressive as he normally is. And against beneil dariush, I think it's very important for Charles to throw all his weapons out there. Whether you talk about his jab, his left to right straight, uppercut, hook, cross, kicks to the legs, body and head, even throw knees to the body, some elbows. Oliveira needs to throw everything out there just to confuse Beneil and confuse Beneil on what shot's coming next. And that's really where Charles Oliveira is so effective in my opinion. The fact that he has so many different abilities and really confuses his opponents. But for beneil dariush, I actually think it's the complete opposite, the keys for him to have success. I think what Beneil needs to do is be very patient and eventually look for that opening where he can fire in that big left hand that he does have, and he could potentially end the fight like that. But my official prediction for this matchup is I think Charles Oliveira is going to win by a second round submission. I think early on Charles might be in a little bit of danger, he might get hurt even early on, but eventually in the second round I think he's going to hurt Beneil on the feet, and once it gets to the ground I think he's going to be able to take the back of a hurt beneil dariush and eventually find the submission that way. Now obviously Beneil, as I mentioned before in the video, has tremendous jiu-jitsu and it's going to be very difficult to submit him, but at the end of the day I think when you're hurt and you have Charles Oliveira on your back, it's nearly impossible not to get submitted. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening in this matchup between these two guys. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Charles Oliveira can beat beneil dariush and get another title shot, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these two videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.